and welcome back to my channel. Thank you so much for being here. This is the last video I have for human trafficking, and obviously it's gonna be sex trafficking. So I decided while I'm at it, I'm just gonna talk about prostitution because I'm probably gonna want to talk about prostitution sometime in the future. So I just thought, let me knock it out right now. So yeah, there's obviously a difference between being sex trafficked and then prostitution. So I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and don't forget to use the comment section down below. And while you're at it, if you haven't already, please do subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. Thank you so much for being here, and let's get into the video. What is prostitution? So it's basically a sexual activity with someone in exchange for money or something valuable, and people can be invited, enticed, offered, persuaded to engage in prostitution. And some people, it's not really like a free will choice, it's like kind of your circumstances. So poverty, race, lack of resources, or violence may play a vital role in someone engaging in prostitution. So females, males, transgender people, homosexual, heterosexual, whatever your sexual orientation, anybody, literally anybody, can participate or become a prostitute. In some societies it is accepted. It's not criminalized or anything, so it's normal, it's accepted. And in some societies it is not, it is shunned upon, and the people are punished with death, imprisonment, or stoning. And usually the people who are punished are the prostitutes themselves and not the clients. Like, the clients usually don't have any legal consequences, and they also play a role, so I don't understand why. Anyway, in some cultures it's a rite of puberty for young girls, and in some it is a means of acquiring dowry. Many people are drawn at a young age to become prostitutes, and it is associated with crime and drug dependency, because sometimes you use drugs, and then in order to acquire the money to buy the drugs, you have to prostitute yourself. Or because you use drugs, then people take advantage of you and then they just prostitute you. So it's a cycle, and they interplay with each other. So the role players are the facilitators. So those would be your pimps, your madams, supervisors. So the people who basically like organize everything for you, or put you out there, or run their business through or with you. So you're basically you basically work for them, and so they put you out there, they advertise you, all of that. And then there's the traffickers, the buyers, and then the prostitutes themselves. In South Africa, prostitution or sex work is actually illegal, and sex workers are very marginalized. So some argue that prostitution or sex work is forced and it equates to rape, while some who support it say that it is sex which requires policy reforms that will provide better working conditions and protection for sex workers. And some also say that the word prostitution or prostitutes gives off the impression that the person is prostitution by their own choice. So being that it is illegal, the sex workers are at risk of violence from the state and non-state actors like family, friends, clients, law enforcement, and it leaves sex workers to a lot of vulnerability, a lot of exploitation, abuse, and HIV infections. And also, because it's not legalized and it's not regarded as work, it's very hard for sex workers to buy property or gain access to the education system, justice, healthcare, banking services. It's just very hard for them to own assets. I don't know if it's probable or possible, but it's very hard for them. So also, they do not go for regular health checks, and they do not carry condoms, because if they carry condoms, like if you have a whole pack of condoms in your bag, then if law enforcement sees you, then they automatically assume that you're a sex worker. And some of them, besides arresting you, some of them will actually take the condoms and then they throw away the condoms or whatever, so that it kind of stops you from going to prostitute. Because I guess the logic is that if you don't have the condoms, then you won't do the work. So health risks are sexually transmitted diseases, and some of them are also required through the drug use, because people will share needles or whatever, and there's an increased likelihood of being economically vulnerable. Some of them, if not most, are unable to negotiate consistent condom use, and they experience violence, criminalization, and marginalization. So the issue comes with the law enforcement, because they cannot report rape, they cannot report abuse, or anything, because they don't have support from law enforcement, which leaves them to being vulnerable to a lot of like abuse, violence, and rape. And some clients will negotiate sex without protection for higher or more money. And I mean, more money might be enticing to them, and you don't know if that client is HIV positive, or if they have an STD or whatever other illness that they may carry. So usually people who use drugs can't, or don't, or can't, maybe they can, but like people who use drugs don't last in a normal workplace. So then they'll go into the streets, and then when they get into the streets, they're exposed to bribes, extortion, physical and sexual abuse. And yeah, so legalizing sex work will just help the government regulate and control the sex trade. Licensing, zoning, healthcare for the sex workers. Sex work is criminalized for a variety of reasons. One, morally, people just think it's wrong. Some think that it just causes more trauma and harm to the women, especially if the person it wasn't their free will, it was because of the circumstances that they chose to engage in prostitution or sex work. And also it perpetuates bad treatment from men towards women or women's bodies, and also it promotes sex trafficking. So now, getting onto sex trafficking, sex trafficked people are victims. So whereas sex workers or prostitutes who choose to engage, who choose to be in the trade, they choose to be there. It's what they do. People who are sex trafficked, they are victims. They didn't choose to be there. They didn't want to be there. So essentially, like with any other human trafficking, their human rights are being violated. So starting with migrants, if you move to another country and you can't find a job, then migrants will usually turn to sex work to survive, because they can't find any other form of work. And so if you're trafficked to another country, not only are you targeted by the police, but you're also targeted by immigrant officers because of your status. So there's surveillance on you, you can get arrested, there's racial profiling, you can get sent to a detention center, you can get deported, and there are other restrictions that are put on an immigrant on their mobility because of criminal trafficking and immigration laws. And also, migrants can actually become clients themselves. So if you move to another country and you're lonely, you don't have many friends or family or whatever, then migrants can actually turn to sex workers, for company or comfort. And there's also something called sex tourism, and that's when the client travels to different countries to find paid sex. So usually they'll go to countries where there's a lower consent age, or it's easy to find paid sex. Just like with all the other types of human trafficking, sex trafficking is the recruitment, transport, transfer, harboring, receiving, or obtaining of a person for prostitution or sexual exploitation. So they use threats, force, coercion, they lie or deceive you, fraud, abduction, abuse of power, or vulnerabilities. So the money or the benefits will be given to the person who has power over the victim. So the person who has trafficked you, they are the ones who will get the money and all that. And so the other issue is people who are over 18 and people who are under 18. So if you're over 18, then usually we'll need to prove that you were forced or coerced or manipulated or lied to in order to get into the sexual trade. But if you're under 18, the fact that somebody is profiting off of your sexual exploitation is enough to prosecute that person. So You don't need to prove that you were forced. You're under 18. You don't need to prove that somebody lied to you or whatever. The fact that you're under 18 and somebody's profiting off of you is enough. Okay, so like I said, men, women, any sexual orientation, everybody can be trafficked. But children are especially vulnerable because they actually believe that they're easily manipulated, and they might believe that what they're doing is helping their families. Like they might believe that, okay, I have to go to this particular country to help my family, or go from Johannesburg to Cape Town, because then these people who's trafficking you is promising you money or is promising to help your family, so they're just easier to manipulate. So street children who don't have homes or families, they're easy to manipulate because also they don't have any guidance. Like there's no older parent or sister or something to protect them. So you can be trafficked by anyone, your mom, your dad, your pimp, your boyfriend. You can be trafficked by anyone, and people are physically locked up in rooms, threatened with the safety of their families, and they pay off debt by servicing men in brothels. So just like with any other type of trafficking, you forcefully convert a human being into a commodity. So you strip them of their human dignity and their human rights for your beneficial. With sex trafficking, there is no choice. You didn't choose to be there, you don't want to be there. Whereas with sex work or prostitution, the person is a willing participant. Now, some might argue that they're not really willing participants if they're only there because of their circumstances, and that's also true. But you get the gist of the difference between trafficking and sex work or prostitution. So the victims of sex trafficking usually have like a lack of basic services such as education, so they'll be promised false jobs and only to be abused, threatened, and sold to the sex industry, and they're kept under the control for paying off debt. So it's like debt bondage again, where because they were recruited, they were transported, they were fed or kept alive, and some of them are then sold. Because of all that, they have to pay back. The fact that you unprovoked sex trafficked me, now I must pay you for your efforts and the money you spend on transport and the money you spend on recruiting me or whatever. So now, for something that you didn't ask for, now you are indebted to that person. So yeah, some victims are used to recruit and traffic other victims. And victims, the sad part is that victims can be detained and prosecuted for prostitution, because law enforcement just sees you as a prostitute. They don't even know your story, they don't even know that you were trafficked, so then they detain you. So now it's the re-victimization once again. Victims of sex trafficking will suffer from psychological and physical trauma, diseases, drug addiction, malnutrition, and obviously they'll be ostracized in society. And some traffickers use the internet to actually advertise the minors or the victims that they have. So they will pose as the victim on the whatever site that they're using, and then they will talk to the John or the client and organize everything, and then your job is just to go there and do your thing, which is very sad and unfortunate. So I guess this is for people who want sex work to be decriminalized. Policymakers must consider corruption, racial, gender, and economic oppressions, harmful traditional and cultural practices, unreliable access to healthcare and childcare, limited affordable housing, general lack of resources, options, and opportunities, combined with the insurmountable barriers within the society we live in. So policymakers must, I guess, be cognizant of all of that when making the decision whether to keep prostitution as criminalized or to decriminalize it. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is all I have for sex trafficking. And also, there's a lot that can be said about human trafficking in general, whether it's sex or labor or child. There's a lot that can be said, and I hope these couple of videos that I made were really informative. And yeah, that's all I have. So I'll catch you guys on the next video.